the truth of who we are is we're not as perfect as we look on the surface. And my problem with politeness and political correctness is that it tries to create this nice little pristine image of, oh, we're all so fucking friendly and good and nice. And we're not. We're these fucking like little animals that just want to fucking feel good, and we don't want to feel bad, and we do fucked up shit all the time, and we don't, not just to others but to ourselves. We eat the bad food we know we shouldn't eat. We don't work out when we should have worked out. We do all sorts of fucking terrible shit, and we know we should not do that. And the thing is that we have these justifications and these denials of reality. And I think that with art, it kind of begs you to go, fuck politeness. Let's get down to what's really happening here. This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte,
exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
We're at it again, another episode for your enjoyment. So this one, Evan and I thought, you know what, we've never really tackled this directly, but we wanted to talk about politeness in art and how it gets in the way. And also, I mean, maybe we're going to get into like being PC or politically correct and some things around that and how that relates to all of this. But there's a quality in which we try to navigate the world and we want to be good people. I think for the most part, not just that we want to be good, I think more importantly and more honestly, we want to be seen as good people. In fact, I think a lot of the time being seen as a good person is actually more important than actually being a good person, which I want to get into later. But part of the politeness and political correctness is that we have a lot of stake in our ego and our identity and how we appear to others, and acceptance and all of this stuff comes into play. And the problem with that is that it can be the antithesis of truth and honesty and being real and authentic. And it comes at a cost. If you're not going to be real, truthful, authentic, genuine, it comes at a great cost. You actually lose a lot of things that you may want. And you might not know that you're giving them up, and you might not know how to get them. And so I think in a lot of ways, by confronting this issue, not only will you have better art, but I believe by moving past political correctness, moving past politeness, moving past the image of looking good, you actually have more of a chance of actually being a good person. And I think for the artists out there and the people who are trying to do something in the world, I think you actually have a chance to create something that is actually special. And I think if you're finding in your art, and I'll just speak to the writers for now, and I'm sure this translates to other arts, other mediums, but if your writing is polite and politically correct, chances are it's not very good. That what we really want is we want to get that layer down. We want to get into the truth. We want to get into that. You know, sometimes those opinions you're not so comfortable with. Sometimes those feelings, we want to navigate those. And it's not about being right or wrong, but it's about daring to explore some of this stuff, because that's what most of us are battling with. And your art is supposed to be a way for us to silently sit in the theater and experience it without exposing ourselves. That's how a lot of the audience feels with the art that you create. So if you're not even willing to go there, you're not giving them the chance to go there. And that might be their only outlet. I'm going to pass it over to Evan. I'm sure he has some thoughts. But yeah, politeness, political correctness. Go ahead, Evan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is going to be one of those interesting ones to navigate, because I don't think I think that there's probably a couple of landmines to sort of navigate around through this as well, because and I'll relay something that I was sharing with you before, something I talked to my acting students about. But in Sanford Meisner, the great acting teacher, used to tell his students fuck polite, right, with when they were doing this work, and that goes on in his training. And a lot of people, and understandably, because from what I know about Meisner is that he was, he was a character. He could be a little bit crusty and all of that, but I don't believe that he was saying that as like, yeah, you just have permission to be cruel and mean and just shit on people. Because from what I understand, the nature of the work that he was doing is about truth. It was about honesty and not letting our conventions of politeness and whatever get in the way of being truthful. Because that politeness can have a really dark shadow to it, right? I remember George Carlin has a famous bit about political correctness where, he says like, we've softened all of these things, the example that jumps to my mind that he had said was, now we call it post-traumatic stress disorder. It's no longer shell shock. And he was using it as a commentary on how terrible the support was and still is for veterans of war who have been traumatized, right? And he's like maybe if we still called it shell shock, these people would be getting the help that they needed, right? He's making that sort of a way of making that point that it's like this sort of softening, this language can nerfing everything up, so to speak, can actually really get in the way of us really dealing with real issues and real problems. And in art, it can prevent us from, I think, getting in touch with the gold, right? Like if we're trying to be polite, whether that's from thinking that we're shielding our audience, but I think more often than not, it's probably we're trying to shield ourselves from what people might think of us if we were to say this or do this. What might people think of me? So I gotta make this more polite. I've got to make this, and there's an element, there's the part of the fine art sometimes is finding the way to say that truth in a way that people will hear it. Right. But, when and you brought up like, risks, and if you're not taking or did you use the word risks? No, you were talking about playing it safe, right? If you're playing it safe, which is kind of that byproduct, right? Which, the opposite is like taking risks and whatever. I always say it's like, well, look, if you tell the truth, right, you don't need to worry about that shit because like it's those risks and those vulnerabilities, those things that you need to do as an artist are going to start coming through, right? The more and more honest that you can get with what you're doing, like the more these little things start to slip through where people go like, oh, holy shit, I can't believe that they said this. I can't believe they put this in there, and we need artists to do that because that's part of, it's not about feeling comfortable and safe all the time. We need to be challenged. We need to have our perspectives, brought a little bit to the fire sometimes, to be like, do you stand up to this, right? Do you still think the same way about this thing, having just seen this or experienced this, right? Do you like, but the more and more we get away from that, the more we can just be sort of siloed in our own little bubbles. And I think there was one last thing that I wanted to say about this, but I feel like it's left me. So, I guess those are my opening remarks about this whole political correctness, politeness, all of that. Like, again, I don't think it has a zero value, but I think that there's a time when it goes too far and it starts to do real harm.
Yeah, well, it is harmful if you are more worried about being liked than you are about doing good. And that's a common thing today. And I'd say that, I've spent a fair amount of time studying, what I would call evil or bad, and just trying to understand it. I'm like, why does it exist? Why? Does anyone ever ask themselves this question? Like, why isn't everybody just kind and nice to each other? Like, why? Like, and nice is not the right word, but why aren't we just good to each other? Why aren't we just good people? And not all of us are. And some of us we're a little more good and a little more bad. And then some of us are just downright, it's like we just let go and they're just evil. Like they're evil, like they're dark and they're malicious and malignant, and they want to harm and they get, it's like a rotten apple, and some people go down that road, right? And a couple things that I've found are that, there's a question, why do people do bad things? Because it's easy. And if you think about any bad thing that you've ever done in your life, which if you don't think you have, then you're either extremely young and you wouldn't be listening to this podcast. You'd be a child that just hasn't dabbled in the world, or you're just totally out of connection with yourself. Because the truth is that you probably did some bad, and it was usually because it was easy and because it was something you wanted and it served you, and you didn't think about the effects or impacts it would have on others. And by the way, even when you do a good thing, there are good things, meaning that sometimes you do what seems like a good thing and it actually hurts somebody and it maybe even hurts multiple people, but you're like, but I intended it to be good. And it's like, yeah, but you still caused all this damage, even though you were trying to do a good thing. I think the number one thing that I always try to, as I've gotten older, because I've done bad things, but look, it doesn't make me a bad person. It just makes me a person. I'm just a human being. But one thing I try to do now is I really try to look at it as like, okay, I'm doing it because it will feel good. That's usually why I'm trying to do something, because I think it'll feel good or it'll bring some good feeling. And if you look at yourself, that's where most of us begin. The body is a big fucking liar. And the sooner you realize that, the better your life gets. Your life gets monumentally better when you realize that your body lies. So your body goes, oh, I want sugar. Oh, I just want to sit and watch TV. Oh, I want to do this thing. That's what your body's going to always try and do. It's comfort. It wants to feel good. It wants to feel warm. It wants to do all these things it wants to feel. And usually, if you listen to it explicitly, you'll become a horrible fucking person, because people who listen to their body above all principle, moral, and ethics become terrible people. And if you look throughout history, it's almost, and that's like the lowest level of evil. That's just where it begins. So that's the first part. So you need to transcend your feelings, particularly your body feelings. And it's not exclusively ignore them though. And this is a really important lesson that I've had to learn in my life, is that sometimes you have to listen to them, but you have to learn when to listen to them. Meaning that sometimes you're having a feeling and it's actually like a warning sign. It's telling you something. It's bringing something to light. It's telling you, hey, you're going the wrong way. Stop doing this. Turn around. So at first, let's kind of use an example with food, right? The cheesecake or the ice cream or the chips or whatever the thing is you eat that you know is not good for you. At first, it feels really good. It tastes good. It feels good. You like it. But eventually what ends up happening is you do too much of it, it actually starts to feel bad. You start to feel lethargic. You start to feel ill. You start to have low energy. You might not even realize that it's what you're eating that's causing this, but it causes these negative feelings. Now you have feelings that are pushing you away from something. So this is kind of the second stage of evil. So first evil begins with, I cheated on my partner because I just wanted to feel good. I wanted something different. People will say all sorts of weird shit like this. Oh, I wasn't getting the love I wanted. I wasn't getting the affection I wanted or the attention I wanted. So they went off and they did this thing. That was about feeling good. And that's, most of us would say that's probably pretty fucking bad, especially if you lied and cheated and deceived. But that next level of bad is a totally different one. And it's almost where the real bad comes in, the real evil. You don't do it because it would feel bad. Where do you think politeness and political correctness exist? It exists mostly in this, it would feel bad. If I told them the truth, I wouldn't feel good. So I'm going to avoid feeling bad, and I'm just going to let them keep doing what they're doing. And really, in truth, you should be willing to take the hit. If you truly love somebody, you should be willing to look bad and feel bad to tell them the thing that would be good for them. So I'm going to pass it off to you, but that's where I think a lot of this conversation exists. Political correctness and politeness actually are one of the enablers of us being very bad and evil in this world. And we don't even want to. We're not trying to. We're just going, well, look, it's not my problem. I'm just doing my life. And, and we tell ourselves, I don't care. But the truth is you do care. And I think the more you recognize you care, the better you begin to make decisions that actually enable goodness in this world. But I think a lot of us convince ourselves, I don't care. I'm just going to eat the cheesecake because I don't care. I'm not going to tell them, hey, this thing's not okay because I don't care. The truth is the moment you start caring, you can begin to be good. You have to care to be good. But one caveat, I'm passing on to you. Sometimes you got to know when not to care. And that's what makes this difficult. That's what makes this a hard thing. It's not just a black and white, care about everything. That's not what I'm saying. Sometimes you have to decide. But what I think it needs to boil down to is not how we feel, but more in how we have principles to, is this good or not? Is this bad or not? So anyway, Evan, I want to pass it on to you. I'm going to reiterate my thought. Bad done because it feels good for you is the first level of bad and evil. The in my opinion, the more darker and sinister version of our bad and evil is we don't do it because it would feel bad for us. But it all comes down to feeling.
Yeah, there's a lot of ground to try and respond to there, and I will do my best. So there can be a type of repression from the sort of politeness we're in our part of the world in Canada, like we're kind of notoriously, at the butt of many jokes for our politeness. I think the English as well would probably be up there but there's always all of this stuff that's going on underneath, right? And hey, sometimes good manners are, I think, necessary for a society to function, where you're like, the truth is I want to punch this guy in the fucking face, but I'm not going to because that's not good for anybody, right? But it's a feeling, and it's there, but anyhow. Should you listen to it though? That's my question. Probably not, right? You probably shouldn't. But
before you go on, please, you're commenting on my point. Sorry. You're commenting on my point. My point is that you want to punch them in the face, and that's where discernment comes, because that's a feeling. And if you did punch them in the face, that would be assault, and it would be bad, and it would be... So we don't want everyone going around punching each other in their face because they feel like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, definitely that discernment is a big part of it. Something what you were saying, being someone who's in a pretty long relationship now at this point, and also, protect this person's identity. But, someone close to me who I know who went through a divorce, I remember asking them before I got married, I said, do you have any advice, any words of wisdom for someone about to get married? And he said to me, if you see something, or if there's something that's going on that's wrong, say something. That was something that he learned because there were all of these things that were not right. There were all these things that were going on in the relationship that were just being, sort of shoved off to the back burner, like, it's fine, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And then suddenly we've got a huge problem, right? And I get that, in my own relationship, because, yeah, it can be hard to say the truth about something to your partner because you don't want to hurt feelings. But yeah, like you were saying, you also sometimes just because you don't want to have to deal with the uncomfortableness that you feel about the whole thing, right? It's difficult. But what I will say is that, because this is something that you say pretty often, which is like, why do people do bad things? Because it's easy. It's like, yes, it's easy in the moment, but it's fucking not easy in the long run. It's harder in the long run to do it that way. And so I always I feel like every time you bring that up, I'm like, I feel like I always got to come in and, and bring up that point. It's like that. It's a harder thing to do in the long run is to do that easy, bad thing. And look, and I have a lot of compassion for doing the easy because, life is challenging. And we're trying to find that path that just makes things just a little bit easier somehow, right? It's so I have trying to make things easier in a world that is very challenging, that is very hard. There's the saying, like, no one ever said that life would be easy, only that it'd be worth it. And so I have a lot of empathy towards why we choose to do those easy things, even though there's this damage that's being done through that process, and why I think that we have to have a lot of compassion and forgiveness for that in each other. And we have to recognize how we do that all the time in our own lives on a day-to-day basis. Right. But we have to, it's kind of like you were talking about the ideals that we have. And, that question of like, well, who is the person that I want to be? What is that thing? Right. And sometimes that makes the choice really obvious and really easy, right? Where it's, it's not a guarantee that things are going to go great by you doing that, but you will at least be an honest and truthful person. And that's respectable, right? That's something that you can live with. That is something that you can sort of take home with you, I guess. It's like in acting, right? It's like, you didn't get the part, but like, I felt great about my audition. I went in there and I fucking did my thing, right? Like, it's kind of like that. There's something that you can at least hang your hat on with that, as opposed to, that what happens when you start to get into the thing of defending the shit decision that you made, like, especially you bring it to the realm of like, adultery, like cheating on a partner or something like that, or betraying a partner in that kind of way. And once you start heading down that path of where you're not taking any kind of accountability, it's like, yeah, sure, maybe your partner is a lot of these bad things, but like, oftentimes when we get so vehemently defensive about some action we took, it's because we know that we did something shit, right? That we had some part that was involved in this whole thing, that we made a decision that we're like, oh yeah, like I did do that, and these were, a lot of great reasons. You can have all kinds of great reasons. And we can probably all think of a time, an example, and whatever as to why we did a bad thing. I remember when I bullied a girl in school. It took me a long fucking time to get over that. The name calling that I was involved with, and like it was ugly. It was really ugly, and I've spent a lot of time looking back on like what was going on in my life. Why did I do that? Why did I do something so awful to somebody? And I found a great deal of compassion and understanding for the person that did that, but I still knew it was wrong when I did it. Like I still knew I was doing something wrong and bad. And so it's not an excuse for it. Right. And that is in a way part of how we become richer as human beings. I think, it's like when we do those things and we go, okay, right. Like where you can hold both of those things at the same time of like, I see where this was coming from. I understand where that came from. There was a lot of pain that was coming from that thing. it was a bad thing that I did. I'm going to try and own up to that. I'm going to try and make amends in the way that I can for that thing, and try and forgive myself at the end of it, right? And become a better human being, right? Become somebody who can maybe help be a guide to someone, or show understanding to someone, or help someone not go down that path themselves, right? Because, and you're not coming from a place of being a propagandist. You're coming at it from the place of a person who's really fucking been through it.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's, I feel like politeness and political correctness, it's not often talked about, but it's also a denial of humility. When people are talking about like, well, this is what's good and this is what's right and this is, it's like, well, here's the thing. One of the things I think a really truthful, honest person does is they're willing to acknowledge and admit when they fucked up or they made a mistake. And I'm very weary of people who are unwilling to acknowledge where they have flawed. Like there's this law, it's an unwritten law, but it's a real law. It's called the law of reciprocation, meaning that if you provide something to someone, they'll generally provide it back. So when you share a story of humility about yourself, tends to be that someone will be willing to share a story of humility about themselves because it's a thing of connection. We want to do it. If you give someone a gift, it tends to be they'll want to give you a gift. It is kind of the way it works. We have this weird, it's not that weird, but it's kind of, we have this innate nature to want to give back because we have this longing to connect with each other. And also, unfortunately, it works. It's a double-edged sword because when someone hurts us, we sometimes also have the inclination to hurt. And there's a saying, hurt people, And there's kind of a truth to that because, when people get hurt and they perceive it as they've been hurt, they feel justified in hurting others. And so another thing which causes bad is that I hurt and it feels, and so someone hurt me, so now I hurt, and somehow you're going by feeling again, and that creates a bad thing, right? But one of the ways in which we learn empathy and we learn to care and we learn to truly be like what I would say like a really depthful human being is to connect with our own flaws, our own humility, and see where we've made mistakes so that when you start to correct them, you actually become a good person. Because when you hurt somebody and you've never been hurt that way, you don't know what that hurt feels like. And they can tell you all day, I'm really hurting, you really hurt my feelings, and you can try to understand it, but you don't really get it. And maybe there's a way to begin to kind of investigate that without being hurt yourself, where you can start to think about it and feel it, and maybe you can kind of get in there. But a lot of the time, our connection to hurt is because, well, I was hurt over here, and now you're hurt this way. And although it's different, it's kind of like the way I was hurt over here. And so I can kind of get what you did. And, man, I didn't like it when I felt that way. And if you feel anything like that, I'm really sorry. And so that's where that kind of compassion and empathy starts to come in, and which is a lot of what creates good. And something I wanted to explore while we're talking about this was like, so as a screenwriter, storyteller, screenwriting just happens to be the medium I tend to focus on the most, is there's these conflict types, right? So there's man versus man, they call it, which is just person versus person. But there's man versus environment, or, man versus monster. And it's interesting because when you look at these conflict types, right, where it's like man versus environment, and say it's like, oh, there's a big volcano or a tsunami that everyone's up against. We don't look at the tsunami as evil. We don't look at the volcano as evil. But when it's man versus man and someone is conflicting, sometimes we will look at that as evil. Unless you attribute the natural conflict to something greater, like a vengeful god or something, but then you're not really talking about the nature. You're talking about the source behind the nature, right? So the reason why I bring this up is because when we talk about man versus man conflict in story, sometimes man versus man is like, we'll look at two people who are in conflict, and we're not quite sure who's the bad one, who's the good one, and it's a dilemma. Sometimes we're like, no, that's the bad person and that's the good person. But one of the things you have to do if you want to be a good storyteller is you have to explore the bad person. And it gets very interesting the further you go down that road. Because if you're going to do it for real, and you're not just going to do a mock of a bad person, you have to go in and go, well, how could I relate to this bad person? How could I justify? You said justify with the, we were talking about justify with the infidelity thing. How do I justify what they're doing? How do I make it make sense for them? And then eventually, if you do it properly, you begin to see, yeah, I can see how they see it this way. I can see why they do it like this. You begin to kind of step in their shoes and understand the position and go, well, they don't know they're bad. Or they do know they're bad, but they don't think it's so bad. And why don't they think it's so bad? And then if you're really keen and you really want to like go deep, you go, maybe I know I do a bad thing, but I don't think it's that bad. Maybe I'm a lot like this antagonist, but in some other kind of related way to my life. And that's the beauty of art, because when you get really real about it, you start to see yourself in other characters. It gets fucking wild. It gets really fucking wild. And it makes you not want to share your work, because you start to think everybody's going to see who you really are. But then you go through this next level and you get experience, because I've been in this I've been in this game for over 2 decades. You just start to realize, hey man, this is what we're all going through. I'm not alone here. This is humanity we're talking about. This is like everybody. Like we're all trying to figure this shit out. And so then you start to become bold enough to share it. And I've referred to this story a few times, but I'll just refer to it again because maybe it's relevant right now. But this story I wrote called Love Lost, where one of the characters, she admits this horrible thing she did. Let's just call it that. And her big struggle in the story was, no one would ever love me if they knew the truth about who I really was, if they knew what really happened. And what she's come to at this point in her life is that she can get all sorts of love on the surface, but she truly believes that no one would ever truly love her if they knew who she really was. And so in this story, she shares her deepest, darkest truth, the thing that she's not forgiven herself for, the thing that she thinks is so irredeemable that she thinks there's no possible way. And for whatever reason in this story, you'd have to read it, but basically, or watch it, but basically she gets to that point. And in a lot of ways, what I was exploring in this story, well, many things I was exploring, but one of the things I was exploring is, can we be forgiven for the things that we did wrong, even if we didn't know how wrong it was? But if we begin to realize, hey, shit, I really hurt somebody. I really did this thing that's just ugly. Like, you share this story about bullying this girl, and on the surface, like, we can look at that and be judgmental and we go, it's so horrible what you did. But it's like this guy who's trying to figure out, fuck, why did I do that? Where was I at? How did that even make fucking sense to me? There's nothing polite about it, is what I'm saying. The truth of who we are is we're not as perfect as we look on the surface. And my problem with politeness and political correctness is that it tries to create this nice little pristine image of, oh, we're all so fucking friendly and good and nice. And we're not. We're these fucking like little animals that just want to fucking feel good, and we don't want to feel bad. And we do fucked up shit all the time. And we don't, not just to others, but to ourselves. We eat the bad food we know we shouldn't eat. We don't work out when we should have worked out. We do all sorts of fucking terrible shit, and we know we should not do that. And the thing is that we have these justifications and these denials of reality. And I think that with art, it kind of begs you to go, fuck politeness. Let's get down to what's really happening here.
It's what comes to mind, sort of like a recent, I would say, a piece of art in the pop sense is the Joker. The movie The Joker is so much about this thing that we're talking about, right? Everyone's just bottled up, and that was, and talking about an antagonist. Here our protagonist is an antagonist. Like, we all know that going into it, right? And we have this understanding of who this character is. And I think, for me at least, the part of what was so uncomfortable about that movie, and it's amazing that I love that movie did as well as it did, because it is challenging the audience. And one of the things that it really challenged me with was, I was like, I hate how much I relate to this guy. I hate how much I connect to his anger and his sense of rage. You know what I mean? And it's like, but I think that was why it was so successful, is because it's like, this is saying something about how I feel, right? And this is it going to a really insane place, right? But there's something that it was expressing within us. It was like, it was one of those movies that hit a bit of a release valve for us. And I remember, like, a while back, we talked about that song that country singer guy, he came out of nowhere. I can't remember his name now, but he wrote that song, and suddenly he was just like, overnight, it was like this. Yeah. But anyhow, like, it was just, it hit a release valve. It hit something, like, there was a, like, cause as beautiful a song as that is, that's tapping into something that was really angry, like that thing of we're all walking around with this shit just all pent up inside of us. And then somebody comes out and they say it, and we go, oh, thank God somebody said it. We can all talk about it. That's why, I think stand-up is so big right now. Like, this is like, it's the prime grounds for stand-up is right now. And why we're seeing so many, because it's like, they are so necessary. That art form is so necessary right now in the face of, a lot of this, I guess, sort of muzzling that's going on, right? That we have people who come out and say, like, well, I'm going to come out and say all the things that you're not supposed to say. How about that? Yeah. Right? We're going to talk about them. We're going to say them. And the thing is, if we're in the right headspace and mood and place about the whole thing, we're going to laugh about it. We're going to have a great laugh about it, and about how silly so much of this stuff is, right? And that's all people that's a kind of truth speaking that's going on. That's like the power that art can have, because stand-up is truly an art form. It's like something I never used to think when I was like, oh yeah, stand-up, I get in there and laugh. It's like, no. Like, this isn't an art form, and it's an essential part of the health of our society, right? Because they're the first ones who can talk about things that you're not supposed to talk about. And they open up a door for us to start talking about these things together. Like, they can take a hostile environment of certain subjects, right? Where it's just like, ooh, and just, even if it's just a bit, just crack the door open a little bit on it, where it's like, oh, maybe I can say this, right? Maybe I can have this dialogue. I can have this conversation. And very often these things they're very serious things, right? Like, it's not to say that these things aren't serious issues or topics or things in the world, but only that we have to be able to talk about these things, and we have to be able to talk about these things with honesty. Right. And, and there's a way to do it, I think. Like, there's a way in which we can look at a situation. Like, for example, just the other day, a coworker of mine was like, they were distraught. Something had happened in the day, and after this thing had happened, they were in a bad place. Like, internally, I knew it was going on. I sensed it was going on, and it was one of those things of, I was having this dilemma of like, do I say something, right? Or do I be polite and safe, right? And just keep to myself, right? And hey, look, sometimes you do just need to shut up and keep to yourself. And, you know, there's all kinds of variables. What's the relationship to this person, whatever. But, you know, I've started to learn that very often people like it and we appreciate it when someone can see us, even if they're not necessarily someone we know super well, right? And so at some point I just said like, hey, how are you doing? Like, you know, I saw that this had happened before. And then in that moment, they just allowed themselves like a second to just kind of like, bruh, like vent, right? Just kind of get a little bit a little bit of that. And, you know, it was still there afterwards, but they allowed themselves a little something, right? And you can still confront somebody with some honesty. And, you know, and there's people I know who are so great at this, who they can say like, hey, I noticed this thing going on. I noticed, you know, maybe something's happening with you. You can talk about it. If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. Right. There's no like whatever. And then you go, it's like, you know, you're not being someone who's prying in and you're giving someone an option, but there's a way in which we can just let people know that they're seen, you know, and seen fully and wholly, and that like this thing that they're walking around with isn't some kind of secret, right? Yeah.
Well, I like that you brought that in. I mean, I really like this whole idea that this thing you're walking around with is not a secret. I think politeness has this way of kind of being like, yeah, like I'll pretend it doesn't exist and you pretend it doesn't exist and we both know it exists, but we'll just keep walking around like it doesn't. And it's like this kind of bullshit, and like, you know, and it stops connection, right? It stops us really getting down to it. And it's like, you know, sometimes I really like it when a friend tells me their opinion, and even if I like, and I disagree with it, and it's like, well, you know, I really think this and da 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 da, and it's like, I don't take it personally. It's like, okay, that's how you see it. Okay. Like, I mean, look, at my best self, I don't take it personally. Maybe there's times where something just, I haven't worked it out and it triggers me a little bit. And I'm kind of like, well, you know, I think it's this, and it becomes a right wrong. And all of a sudden we're into something. I mean, it doesn't happen too often anymore. I feel like I'm a little more level headed as I get older. I think that's just something that happens as you get older and you fucking work. Maybe not. For me, I suppose. I don't know. I should try to work things out. But I'm like, okay. But I like, okay, that's how you see it. This is how I see it. But I like it when we can have a conversation where it's like, you know, we talk to someone about something and it's like, it's not about you. Like, we might disagree, but it's not about you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong. It's like, I understand because you're telling me why you see it this way. And then you understand why I see it this way. And we can't really find a common ground to agree. And we're going to walk away and you're still going to see it that way. And I'm still going to see it this way. And that's okay. And there's no like personal offense. It just is what it is. We just see it differently. But, you know, it's nice if we can both kind of walk away and chew on what the other person presented to us as some points, right? So there's a couple things I wanted to comment on. One was, I do think that, you know, I think we have to keep in mind that there is tact involved in things, that it's good to have the intention to not want to harm, hurt, or be cruel or be mean. And I think political correctness and politeness carries with it these things which are good. And so I think that having manners, being polite, and good-natured in your approach to things requires a certain amount of tact of like, you know, I could say something, but should I say something? And like, you have to ask yourself that, because you could, but should you? And just because you could doesn't mean you should, you know, and there's that kind of element to it. I think another element, which I'm trying to remember at the moment here, is, oh man, what was it? Ugh. Oh man, I'm
Do you
forgetting.
need a moment?
Sometimes, man.
I
Okay, you got something? All right,
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
I'll think about it.
I'll give you a second to just chew on it, and because there was something else that had come to mind that it's like, yeah, it was something that I heard on another podcast. It was, I think, Eric Weinstein. He's a mathematician, and he was characterizing a lot of sort of the time we're in right now. And by the way, this sort of time of that we're in right now is actually pretty similar to times in the past as well. as I discovered it when it comes to like a lot of this, politeness and political correctness, whatever you want to look at this as. But he had this image of, it's like we're, walking down the street and you're coming up on like there's some sort of a police incident on the side of the road. That there's cop cars, there's emergency vehicles, there's do not cross tape, and you're walking past, and there's an officer there saying like, keep moving, folks, nothing to see here, and that's sort of the thing, and how that's so much about kind of this moment that we're in right now, which is like, well, we all know there's something there to see. We know there's not nothing there. Something's happened. Something is going on here, but we're all just going along with it. You know what I mean? Like it's, and like you could take that metaphor and extend it further out to be, it's like, well, yeah, you might not have any business at that scene whatsoever, but for us to pretend like there's not something going on, times can be a big problem.
Yeah, okay. You know what? I remember what I was gonna say, and I'm gonna come back to that, even though this feels like maybe a transition. Okay, I think you talked about seriousness, and sometimes these things we do, they are serious. But whether we should take them seriously or not, I think is a part of managing some of this politeness and political correctness. And I think that there's a certain amount of, taking things a little bit lightly. I feel like when you begin to see that all human beings are relatively the same and our experiences are relatively the same, that the things we go through are not really all that much different, even though we have different experiences and we're like, whoa, you lived through that story? Like, I've never lived through that story. We still kind of tap into the same feelings and experiences, even though we live different stories. That's why storytelling is so powerful, because like we watch this character go through something we've never been through, but we're like, I kind of get that. That's kind of like, we might not even logically think this way, but we kind of get it. We're like, that's kind of like when I went through this. And it's like they're going through something different, but we have this like relationship to it, experiential relationship. And I feel like connection is largely based on the fact that you tell me a story. I've never lived your story. I've never been through what you've been through, but I can kind of get the experience of what you're telling me, and that bonds us on another level. And that's a lot of how friendships and relationships are built. This whole thing about not taking things seriously, I think, is a survival tactic, and not in a survival like I'm trying to survive, but actually a thrival tactic. I would like to rephrase it as that, even though I have to kind of classify it as like it's survival, because really it will make you survive. When you're being attacked, that word attacked has to be perceived by you as attack many of the times that you're being quote unquote attacked. So like I went camping with my brother. We did this last summer, and we had a big group of people. We were ATVing, going through the woods, it was having a good time, right? And there's this guy in another camp, and he was alone, and one of our friends was like, oh, let's go see who's around. We went over to this guy. He made us some hamburgers. He was a really nice dude, right? And we invited him out for the next day. Had a great day with him. Everything was really good. Well, he drank too much that night. He was having a blast, but he drank too much. And he was the kind of guy, in my opinion, in my experience and observation, couldn't really handle his alcohol at a certain point. Started to kind of, something was seeping out from underneath. Some hurt, some pain. Based on the things he said, it sounded like he probably got pretty abused or mistreated by his father or some other people in his life who were older. Well, we were all around the fire, and as we're around the fire and we're eating, meat, it's getting later, everyone's having drinks, people are slowly going back to their tents and their campers and whatever, and everybody's kind of slowly dispersing. And this fellow who is invited into the party, him and my brother, they start having it out. But it's like, they're like kind of joking with each other, but it's kind of mean. It's not like he's calling my brother old, and my brother's calling him fat, and both of them are kind of right. But at the same time, it's like, guys, you are treading fucking dangerous territory here. Like you guys seem like you might start to fight. And it was very interesting because this guy could start to see some, what I would call a little bit of ugliness kind of coming out of him. He'd been really good all day, but I started to see this kind of like cruel or meanness coming out. Like he was beginning to compete with my brother, almost like he wanted to prove himself to my brother. And the way he was trying to do it was almost tear my brother down, because he like looked up to my brother, but at the same time, and he would say things like that. He's like, oh, I really look up to you. But at the same time, he would attack him and give him some low blow. And my brother, was very interesting watching him deal with this. The guy would say something to him, and my brother wouldn't take it personally. He would like laugh at it. He would see the humor in the attack. And it totally disarmed the situation. And this went on for like half an hour. And I'm kind of sitting there, and as people started to leave more and more, it's just like, I'm just the only one here. And I'm just like, I'm tired of this shit. I want to go to bed. So eventually I'm just tired of them doing their fucking banter. And I'm like, this is uncomfortable. And I'm kind of not uncomfortable enough yet to say anything. But I'm just like, maybe if I leave, they'll both just say, hey, like, it's the end of the night, let's go. And the two of them are still up. And all of us in the whole fucking campground that are in our group, there's a lot of us, we can all hear them fucking laughing and joking and being mean to each other. And it's starting to get uncomfortable. You can just feel it. It's like a vibe. Also based on the content that's being said. But I'm just like, holy fuck. And I really want to go to sleep. Like, it's like the middle of the night now. It's like in the wee hours. It's the morning, right? And I'm just like, guys, can you shut the fuck up and just go to sleep? Like, holy shit. And like, at this point, they were like, I was worried they were going to get in a fight. And it was just like, neither was backing down. And it was this really weird experience, because it's like, you got two guys who their egos are starting to get involved. And this challenging of each other is becoming like not good. Like, I don't know a way to put it. It's just not good. It's like, are you guys going to fight? And it's like, we don't want anyone to fight here. We've been having a good time all weekend. Like, let's calm this down. And they were at the point where they were like about to fight. Like, you could just hear it. Like they were challenging each other. It went from this joyful, playful joking, and it lasted for so long because they weren't taking it like too seriously, but then they started to take it more seriously. And I was at this point where like no one was speaking up in the camp, but I knew I could hear people rustling. I could hear that other people were up, and everybody was kind of scared, but it was my brother. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I feel like I can step in because I'm friends with this guy, and I'm good with my brother, and I can be the kind of middle guy where I was just kind of like, listen, I like you, but go home. And Mike, shut the fuck up and go to sleep. You know what I mean? Like, guys, everyone's trying to sleep. I'm trying to like rationalize with them so they can fucking, they got so mad at each other. I can't even remember how it ended up splitting up. The other guy went home, fortunately. My brother went to sleep. There was kind of the next morning. So we're all talking about it the next morning. I know I'm telling a bit of a story here, but we're all talking about it the next morning. And there's this awkwardness. There's this awkwardness amongst the whole camp because everybody had heard this big kind of almost fight that broke out at the fire at the end of the night. And there was this kind of like, hey, like this guy was a friend who is a new person, but invited into this group. And my brother was like, you know what? we just got into it. He's like, tell him to come over, tell him he's welcome. Like, let's not like water under the bridge. We just, whatever. And they both like, well, my brother was like, we just got ahead of ourselves, whatever. It was like, and this guy didn't want to come back because to him, he had taken it so seriously, that fight he had taken so seriously. And it was really a tough position for me because, it's obviously my brother. And then this new guy who he bonded probably with me. Out of all the people in the camp, he just tended to bond with me. But now he was kind of at a split. And he felt if he came back to the camp that it was like almost like embarrassment. But it was like, you're just two guys who fucking were around a fire and you just got into some fucking shit that was inside of you. And like we can move on. But I feel like sometimes when people start sharing the truth, sometimes we're not ready to deal with the truth. And my brother's a bit older. This guy was quite a bit younger. So I feel like my brother was like, yeah, well, I've heard everything under the sun. I've been attacked. I've heard all that stuff. So he was just like, you know what, whatever, just fucking guys. But this guy who was younger, who was our guest, also he was an outsider. So in his defense, he probably felt like he was an outsider and that was harder for him to come back to the group. But I think for him, he just felt like he was embarrassed. Like he just said, I'm embarrassed. I should have never done. I came into your camp. I did this. And he just decided to leave. He didn't even come back and he left some stuff at our camp and he just left. He's just so embarrassed. And it's like, you don't have to be embarrassed. Like all of us were kind of like, that sucked. And like at the end, when it got bad, like none of us wanted that. But at the end of the day, like you don't have to just leave and be embarrassed. Like you could, like in a way, I don't think he understood that though. And he left before we could do it. And I think my point in all of this is that when we overstep our bounds of political correctness and being polite, there's an embarrassment and a humility that comes with that. And I think sometimes when we recognize that maybe we told the truth, but we hurt someone's feelings, and maybe we didn't do it in a very crafty, kind of compassionate way, there's an embarrassment to that. Even though in a way we were telling our truth and maybe even the truth, it's kind of like we feel embarrassed that we expose the truth of who we are. And I feel like art kind of does this sometimes. You know what I mean? Like where you maybe like, for example, as a writer, you write something that actually exposes something true. And then you're almost embarrassed that you wrote it because now something about you that you've been able to keep hidden gets exposed, but actually that might be your best creation yet. And truthfully, had that guy not left, I'm trying to name names. I named my brother, but whatever, anybody could track that down. But the thing is that had he come back and had he just been like, okay, water under, he would still be a part of this friend group. He would have been invited this summer to come back. Like it all would have been fine. But the thing is I think what happened was he exposed something about himself that he was quite literally embarrassed about, and he felt ashamed. And the thing is like, none of us were, in a way, we all kind of understood. We were all kind of like, yeah, like it sounds like he just had like a really fucking shitty dad who like, we're all like, oh yeah, we kind of get that. You know what I mean? It's kind of like weird, but it's like, yeah, but like he actually let us know who he was more than ever. And in a way, he was so embarrassed by showing us that he ran away and he never got to see that like we all actually like accepted him.
That's an interesting story that you've shared. And it's interesting because like I wasn't thinking when you were telling it that he was embarrassed about those things that he shared. I was thinking that he was embarrassed about the scene that he had sort of created with your brother.
I think that was part of it.
Yeah, and it could be a mix of things. Yeah, definitely. Like, if you become vulnerable with somebody, especially if people you don't necessarily know super well, there can be a feeling of embarrassment to that. I can get that for sure. And there's just something that, this sort of exchange that was going on between this guy and your brother that spoke to me in relationship to this conversation in an interesting way, because, and it reminded me of something that I see sometimes in my classes, as well, which is when there's this sort of beating around the bush of something. And that also comes out of very often politeness. And makes me think that as well, it's like, politeness is kind of the catalyst to passive aggressiveness. Because passive aggressiveness is this like, is aggression that's dressed up as in a suit or a dress or however you want to put it. It's like, but it's got this layer of like being polite on it, but it's just not at all. And there's something that's very scary and dangerous about that whole thing, and I see that in my classes when the exercise, the Meisner exercises of repetition and stuff, when I can see that there's a kind of a friction or a tension and no one's acknowledging it. Everyone's just sitting there and trying to find something else to comment on and the exchange that's going on between them. No one's acknowledging the elephant in the room here. Like it's like, somebody please say this, because it starts to get really dark. Like it's like it actually has this feeling, at least for me, but very often like the other people in the room, like they can all sense it too. It's like, well, what's going on right now? Like there's something really uneasy that's happening, and there's these weird little sort of snipes, and then there's these little sort of like ways that they start treating each other, and it becomes really kind of, it just becomes very dark, right? And it comes out of this sort of beating around the bush, this not just acknowledging the truth of it. And so the story of your brother and this guy, it's just like, well, here they are, and yeah, ha 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 ha, right? Okay, we're laughing, and we're taking these kind of little shots at each other, and I just go, it's like, what was not being said? What's the thing that's not being said here? That both of these people, they're sitting on something, and that's not being said, and it's just, and when you don't do it, it just starts coming out. This shit starts coming out in these ways that are, you were talking about evil before. It's almost like this shit starts coming out in these weird, evil little ways. Oh, you fat. Oh, you're old. You're oh, ha, ha, ha. Meanwhile, like the pressure is just building up, and this thing is just a time bomb. Yeah. Right. And I think that has to do with this thing of being polite. Well, a polite person doesn't, even though a lot of the shit that they're saying to each other isn't polite. Right. But somehow that was more polite to do that than to just say the thing of what's going on, which I'm, could only speculate. And I don't know enough to know what that could have been, but I don't know. That was just that story got me thinking about all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a thought on this. So I think you're right about that. And I think with my brother and this other young man, like the way they were talking, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, well, you guys are the same. And that's the thing, is like, you guys are almost positioning yourself different. But the thing is if you get boiled down to like what you're both talking about, you both actually could connect in such a great way. But I think what was missing, particularly near the end, was there was an inability or an unwillingness to be vulnerable with each other. Because I look at, I look at this guy and I look at my brother, and like they both had hard relationships with their dad. And in a way, like it was like two men who had been hurt, who didn't know how to deal with their hurt in a way. But they both had their own way of dealing with it, which was somewhat surprisingly similar, but they both had their own way of dealing with it without ever admitting and just being honest about like where it was at. And had they actually just got down to the vulnerability of it all, they probably would just like have realized they aligned. And actually one of our good friends afterwards, he always comes in after something happens. This is the kind of guy who always comes in and he always has these like great wisdoms. He's just one of those fucking guys who's like almost like your token wisdom guy who just comes in. He's like, oh yeah, it's like, whatever. But one thing he said, and it stood out to me, was just like, he's like, because they were drinking, right? He was like, they call hard alcohol spirits. And he's like, it's almost like you guys both had a spirit inside of you that was like acting out something. And I know that probably doesn't sound so wise, but it's kind of like this idea that that wasn't really you speaking. That was almost like the spirit was speaking through you, this part of you that like has not been vocalized, and it just couldn't be exercised in that moment. It couldn't. And so what's happening is you guys are combating almost someone else's thing, like maybe your fathers are fighting in a way. It's like, this isn't really you. This isn't really you. Because if you look at these two men in a certain way, although different, if they could have connected on how they both were just, it says maybe is my opinion, maybe it's my observation. I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm pretty good at this stuff, but I felt like they were just two guys who had to be fucking macho and tough in their life, and they had to both figure out how to do it. And they were both hurt little boys at some point. And if they both could have just been like, yeah, isn't it fucked that we dealt with that? Isn't it fucked that we had to fucking be like this to overcome that shit? And instead of breaking that down, it just became the two guys that were just boys fighting against an authority, And I think the thing is like, that's the great thing about art for me, is like art makes you like investigate something like that. At least with writing, I find that with something like that, it slows things down, and you can kind of look into it, and you can go like, well, where does this come from? Why do I feel this anger? Like, because like as a writer, sometimes you create a character, or you're watching a movie, or you're reading a script, and you're just like, I fucking hate this fucking person. But because I really want to be a good storyteller, I always ask myself, why do I hate this person? Why do I don't like this person? And then you do enough work, you begin to try to find out, like, where is that in me that I don't like? And you stop making it an outside thing, you make it an inside thing. Because I truly believe that most all of our conflict, if not all of it, is actually us just fighting ourselves, projecting it onto the world outside of us, or another person outside of us. And at the end of the day, I think what was happening with these two guys in this situation was they were both projecting a part of themselves they didn't like on the world. My brother was, can't be fat, and this guy, he can't be old. And they were like, amongst other things, and they were projecting this shit onto each other. And they were just combating this thing inside of themselves that they didn't like in themselves. And they were just both being the projection that each was actually just fighting with something inside themselves. And I know it's kind of like a complex way of looking at it, but I honestly think that most of our problems in the world are really just an unhealed version of ourselves being played out in the outside world. Heavy, I know. But this is the thing I love about art, Evan. It's like, I feel like we have these conversations, and we came in here talking about politeness and political correctness, and maybe politeness and political correctness, I'm just thinking of this moment, is a way from us to protect ourselves from ourselves. And maybe if we broke down the walls a little bit on this politeness and political correctness and took ownership of what the truth would be, because like, we don't say it because we don't want to be cruel, but like, we have to understand that it's cruel or mean. For example, for us not to want to do it, we have to be able to recognize that, hey, if I said this, it would be mean, which means that you have the empathy or compassion or understanding to say, if someone said that to me, I would perceive it as mean, so I don't want to say it. And actually, that's an act of love. And I think that one of the great combatants of political correctness and politeness is that if you come with the intention of love, you will begin to break down the walls that actually limit you. So if someone is overweight, for example, and they're unhealthy and they're not taking care of themselves, well, I'll give you a better example. My grandmother smoked. My mom smoked. And my grandmother smoked and my mom smoked. My grandmother died of lung cancer, and she was only 69, and I was like a 17-year-old kid, and that was fucking devastating to me. And I watching someone die of lung cancer at a young age is fucking brutal. It's fucking brutal. Then my mom was smoking after my grandma passed away. And I would beg my mom, please stop smoking. I would get so mad at her. I just did everything I could. Eventually she quit. She found her own way to it. But the thing is for me, I imagine my mom dying of lung cancer like my grandma died of lung cancer. And so for me, there was like this, I don't care if this pisses you off. I don't care if I'm annoying. Because I don't want to see you die. You know what I mean? And it's, even though you're kind of doing something that's kind of mean. I'll tell you a story. Okay, I got to tell this one story before I pass it on to you. There's one time, so my mom and I for a little bit lived in a townhouse, and my mom would go to the deck, which was below my room, and she would smoke a cigarette at the end of the night. And my window would be open, especially on a summer day, and her smoke would come up and come into my room, and it fucking pissed me off so much because not only could I smell it, and I didn't want to smell it, but also I knew she was smoking. This one time, I smell smoke come in my room. It's like I'm laying in bed. I'm maybe falling asleep or about sleep, and I wake up. I can't really go through my window because there's a screen. I just go, quit fucking smoking. I'm so fucking pissed. And then I hear the cigarette goes out. Well, I didn't hear the cigarette go out, but the door shuts and closes. Turns out my mom was in bed. She wasn't even fucking out there. It was the neighbor, and they fucking stopped smoking. I just thought that was so funny. But it was like, like this kid is just like fucking, but I was like, but it was like out of love. Like I was just like, it wasn't even that I was fucking annoyed. It was just like, I was so adamant about just like, you know what I mean? Anyway, I feel like there's a kind of thing where sometimes when you're polite, it's embarrassing later because you're like, I should have said something. But as almost embarrassing as that story is, because I told a stranger who was like, look, they're smoking. Like, I know like they're my neighbor. I mean, I knew them, but I didn't care about them like I care about my mom. It's just like, I'm still not embarrassed about that because in a way that stopped them smoking a cigarette and like, you know, whatever, for my belief system, it's like, hey, I don't think that's good. But anyway, I don't know. I just feel like sometimes when you don't speak up, that's actually what's embarrassing. And I think when you look back, sometimes you go, hey, I wish I did say something.
Yeah, I can definitely think of a few moments where I wish I had said something and where I didn't because I was, just trying to be polite and that's that's you know, but I think you bring up a good point. I think we should wrap this one up here, but you know, it was sort of a thought that was starting to come in, and I feel like you've just sort of solidified it in this whole thing of, you know, if you're going to be a person who tells the truth and is honest, which I think is just a good thing across the board. And as we've been talking about, you know, there's always you know, read the room, know the situation kind of thing that's going on, because, you know, I've also met these odd individuals who they're all about just sort of like throwing something in your face about you, right? That like that's it's true, but at the same part it's just like, hang on, motherfucker, I don't know you. Mm-hmm. You haven't earned the right to talk to me like that. Yeah. You know, like you and you're not doing it out of care. Yeah. That's the thing, you know, you said love and all that, but it's like you're not saying this out of care. You were just saying this because there's some part of you that is getting something out of being this person, right? Like I could be anybody, right? Like I literally could be anybody, right? But I'm the one who's here, so you're the one who's saying this, right? So it's like that matters a great deal as to who it's coming from and that there's care that's behind it, right? You know, like there's like, is this something that you're being honest because this is something that is actually I could learn from or get something from? I've had people just like I had someone who like an old high school friend. You know, I hadn't seen this person or talked to them in like probably a decade, and I saw them and she's like, whoa, you lost a lot of hair, hey man. And I was just like, okay, like, and it was just, and there was these little snipes actually through the rest of the thing, and it was like, what, like, there's nothing to be learned about this here, like, you're just kind of taking shots at me, and like, yeah, it's like you're being, like, you're not saying anything that's untruthful, but at the same time, you're not coming from a place of care. You know, there's some other weird thing that's going on right now in this interaction, and why you're saying these things to me, right? Like, this feels like this is coming from a place of actually trying to hurt, right? Like you're actually trying to hurt me right now. And despite the honest fact, and this, I think, just kind of comes back to the point of, you know, like, fuck polite. Yeah, but it doesn't mean being cruel. Right? You can avoid being polite and not be cruel, right? Or you can be honest in a way that is polite, right? Like, you can be honest and direct in a way that isn't being a total dick and isn't being malicious and isn't being, and again, it comes back down to that thing of like, where is the care? Where is the love? Or a good question to check in with yourself, right? Is to just ask yourself, is like, oh, is this thing that I'm noticing, that I'm thinking about speaking out, is this coming from a place of actual caring? Is this coming from an actual place in me that is loving and wishing well, right? Because if it isn't, then you should probably shut up. Yeah. That's one of those cases where you should probably shut up. But if there's something caring in there and in you, when this thing becomes, when whatever this truth becomes aware to you, then I think that maybe you should probably share it, right? And that's not always necessarily mean that it's going to be well received, because very often it can be hard to hear certain things, right? So sometimes you won't always hear a great reaction, but you're going to have a better chance at it if you're actually coming from a place of caring, right? And very often explaining that too is helpful. Where it's like, look, I'm only saying this because I've noticed this and this, and I'm concerned, or whatever it is, you know, and because then the person is like, okay, maybe I don't want to answer them, and maybe I'm a little irritated, but I know they're coming from a good place, and that can really diffuse things. So I'm going to hand it back to you, but we should close this one out.
Okay. I do have some things to say, Evan, but I'm going to save them for after, and I'll use them as my wrap up. Okay. Well, this beer I got, it's called Big Sexy Funk India Pale Ale from Strathcona Brewery, which is in Vancouver. They always knock out a pretty good beer, in my opinion. I've always been quite impressed. This beer in particular, to me, has been a real slow drinker. I don't know about you, Evan, but I've had a few. This is my third of these, not tonight. This is my third of this beer over the week or two. And every time I have this beer, it's like, I just feel like it's just a slow and easy, like, it's not easy. It's not, I wouldn't even call this an easy drink. It's not easy. It's not even, it's a very flavorful, to me, it's a very flavorful. It's a bit of a punch in the face, not in a bad way, but in a like, hey, like, I'm getting a lot of flavors here. There's a lot of stuff going on. And it's not just one that I'm just pounding back and getting on to the next one. I don't know what kind of review that is. I mean, I'm just saying this is the beer that this is my experience of it. I mean, if you want to have a very flavorful, in my opinion, long-lasting kind of beer that's like a real, like, it's almost a one that makes you stop and just be with it. That's how I experience this beer. So, yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts? I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, I mean, I put this one down a little faster than you, and you know, for an IPA, like it's been a while since we've drank an IPA on here, I feel like, but this has been, I mean, it's as drinkable as an IPA as you'll get. Is my sort of evaluation of it. Like, it's very pleasant. Like, it's not something that you can drink fast, for sure. Not many IPAs are something that you can just slam down. But yeah, it is. It's one that, like, you got to slow down and enjoy it. But I've really enjoyed I've really enjoyed this one. I thought it was really tasty. It's very juicy. And I always like that in an IPA. I like it to be juicy because it just makes it, as opposed to just being like a hop punch to the face, which sometimes they can be, and they're just bitter and there's nothing to mellow it out. This is nicely balanced, I think. So to me, this is a winner. I definitely pick this one up and enjoy it. But yeah, it's one you take your time with, for sure. But it's still very, very enjoyable to drink. So that's my evaluation. Well, I'll just spit some out and then I'll let you have your thoughts here at the end for the closing comments. I mean, really, I don't know what else I have to say about this one necessarily, but other than, like, don't let being polite and political correctness get in the way of telling the truth or being at least honest of whatever it is for you, right? Like, be honest, right? But be caring and compassionate, like, it's not like one or the other. It's like that there's only space for one of these things to occupy the room. They can both occupy the room. Compassion and honesty, they actually make really fantastic partners, right? In fact, they make the best partners because when they go together, people really hear you, right? And I think that's kind of the line that a lot of artists walk with their work, is that line of compassion and honesty, right? I mean, what greater path to connecting to the heart of someone else is there than that, right? That thing of like, oof, I get it. I'm a human too. I've felt these things. I've been through these things. I understand it. And now also here's what I know about that. Here's what I can say about that thing in real experienced life. I can talk about this thing, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We can talk about these things, and it's okay to talk about these things, and we should talk about these things. We need to talk about these things, and we need to be able to do that in a way that's as direct and honest as possible.
Well, yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation. Well, I'll say this. Okay, one thing is polarization. The more you tell the truth, the more you'll begin to see what really is, and that can be really uncomfortable. So the more I learned boundaries, the more I was able to tell the truth, because I had to be less polite and more honest about how I felt and where my boundaries were. And what that did is it began to polarize things. I began to see where people respected me or didn't respect me. I could see more. I could see the falsities in people that I never saw before. All sorts of interesting things came to light. Not always comfortable, I will say, but telling the truth, although difficult, is a good thing for you. It actually improves your life. It monumentally improved my life. The more I became courageous enough to speak my truth, the better my life got. But it was really hard, and sometimes I would do it wrong, like I would do it poorly. So I would set boundaries that were too hard, or I'd say the truth more than I was appropriate, and then I'd be, that was embarrassing. I shouldn't have done that, I want to say this to people out there who you're dealing with the attack truth, like you dealt with, like, oh, you lost a lot of hair, that type of shit. A rule that I learned was, because I was bullied when I was a kid, and I learned how to deflect this for the most part. I learned how to deal with it and appropriate it in my life. I'd say, never let anybody get you to focus on yourself. And that should be a rule in art, and that should be a rule in acting. It should be a rule in life. If anybody starts to get you to focus on you, red flags should come up very immediately. Because you shouldn't you shouldn't spend time being focused on yourself. It's you'll nitpick yourself, you'll pick yourself apart, you'll destroy yourself. So if someone comes at you and they make a comment about you, you need to turn the response is to turn it around on them immediately. Don't ever answer the question. Don't ever respond. So if someone comes at you, they go and they make an attack on you like, oh, you know, you're kind of fat or something. You go, what's your problem? And you shut up. Then that make them answer. Or you repeat what they said. You came here to say I'm kind of fat? Shut up. Don't say anything. Because what that immediately does is it turns it on them. Now they have to admit or acknowledge that they said something shitty. And if they truly did say something shitty, watch what they do. It becomes very, very interesting. Watch them fucking squirm. Because little people who are insecure, who attack you on person, they're doing it out of insecurity, right? So they suddenly now it exposes their insecurity. Yeah, I'm not justified to say that. Oh, fuck. Now what do I do? Oh, I didn't really mean it, man. I'm just joking. Yeah, well, your joke sucks. And shut up. I'm telling you, bullies, insecure people, they will fucking squirm in front of you. Watch them fucking cower away. I became so fucking powerful in my life, and I'm not saying this to be braggy, because I fucking despise people that come at me and try to fucking take me down a notch. I'll fucking destroy you. Do you understand? I was bullied so fucking hard, you have no fucking idea. And I want to teach people who are getting picked on by insecure people to turn it around. Turn it around on them. That is not truth. That is them exposing their insecurity. And that's what I mean by polarization. The thing is that as you become a truth teller, you become courageous. And as you become courageous, the world opens up to you. And I've been trying very hard to become courageous. And I often find I'm not courageous as much as I would like. And I'm more cowardly than I would like. And I can acknowledge that, but I'm working at it. But it takes courage to turn it around on someone, especially when they fucking sting you. When they come at you and they say something to you that you're insecure about and you don't feel good about and you're trying to work through, and they fucking hit it right on the mark. They push that button. You got to get the deflect response of turn it around on them. I don't focus on me. You don't focus on me unless I invite you to focus on me. That's my rule. That's my boundary. You don't even fucking get to talk about me unless you're welcomed. And the only way you're going to be welcomed is I need to know that it's coming from love. I need to know you're a good-hearted person. You have to earn that shit. If you ever want to talk about me, don't even fucking talk about my world. You have no fucking idea the life I lived. You have no idea the experiences I went through. And I'm saying this to you, Evan, too. Like, don't ever let anybody fucking attack you. And this is a model for acting, too, right? Our energy should be outward. What am I doing? What's the scene about? What's going on? What's going on for you? Don't ever let them turn it around on you. And if it is coming from a place of care and love, it's okay, because it's like, if someone really truthfully loves you, they're like, hey, you know, I noticed you're kind of struggling, or I noticed this, you know, they're going to do it in a way where it doesn't feel bad. And you go, you know, I am kind of struggling. Right? You know, I did put on a little bit of extra weight or something. They comment on you. It's like, what's going on? What's happening? You know what I mean? It's like, it's a caring thing. The conversation becomes this productive, beautiful thing. But when you're dealing with a bully, they're using their insecurity to tear you down to somehow feel better about themselves. You have to be willing, you have to be courageous enough to identify this. And my rule is, if someone comes up to me, they have not earned my trust, they don't get to talk about me. And also, I'll take that further. You don't get to talk about my family. You don't get to talk about my loved ones. You don't even get to talk about my fucking cat. Unless you earned it. And if you earned it, I'll entertain it. But if not, it's coming back at you. And I'm going to fucking put a microscope so fucking hard on you that all your insecurities are going to come out. And I'm going to look at you right in the fucking eye. And I'm going to make you fucking squirm. Because you're trying to make me squirm. And I know what that's like. And a bully should be seen for how fucking small they are. And I don't mean a bully as a bad person, but they're an unchecked person. So The reason why I'm so passionate about this, and the reason why I'm finishing with such fucking fire, is that the truth lets you stop getting fucking walked on. The truth throws things back where they need to be. But when you're polite and someone comes up to you and they say, oh, your hair's coming, and you go, oh, and you let that go, don't fucking let that go. Don't let that shit go. And for all the people, like all the kids out there, if there's any kid out there, you're in school and you're being bullied, don't ever let that shit go. You don't have to fucking fight that person. You don't have to do anything. They could be fucking 2 feet taller than you. I'm telling you, I've made men who are fucking 7 inches taller than me, who are fucking 100 pounds. I've watched them fucking squirm because I'll turn it around on them. And they don't know what to fucking do. Because I come off as a relatively kind, soft, gentle person, which I am at heart. But I had to learn to fight for myself because being gentle and soft is not always the truth. And it's very hard to do when you are a very sensitive, emotional, gentle person. It's very hard to do this. And it's taken me a fucking lot. For some people, maybe that's easier. For me, it's hard. But the thing is that I've learned that that's what boundaries are. And I feel like the truth is the ultimate boundary.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.